Welcome to the e-learning module of the European Commission's DG Environment Environmental Compliance Assistance Program. This module has the main goal to make you aware on the European environmental regulation concerning small and medium enterprises and to give you the opportunity to learn how your company can become more and more sustainable and environmentally compliant. The European environmental regulation concerning SMEs is actually a wide topic, and we have decided to focus our attention only on those instruments and mechanisms which are really useful to all those SMEs that really want to be environmentally compliant. EU environmental regulation concerning SMEs is based on the following three pillars. Legislative instruments, such as the directives on energy efficiency, waste management, water policy, and industrial emissions. Technical instruments, such as life cycle assessment, environmental footprinting, and environmental impact assessment. Financial support mechanisms, which include, for example, the LIFE program, COSME, and Horizon 2020. The content of each macro area will be described in the next pages of the present e-learning module. In order to better understand the impact of European environmental regulation for SMEs, it is fundamental to start from a solid conceptual basis regarding legislative instruments. SMEs often consider the environmental legislation as a complex and puzzling issue, and the European Union, therefore, wants to help them better understand this matter and become compliant with all European environmental laws, regulations, standards, and other requirements. Whilst the individual environmental impact of each SME are generally small in comparison to those of large companies, the cumulative environmental impact of the sector is huge. The PPP principles of the EU environmental legislation are the following. The first one, the polluter pays principle, states that the price of a good or service should include the cost of environmental damage that results from the production process. A simple example of this principle is a tax on oil, because when we consume oil, we create pollution. The tax means the price we pay contains the social cost as well. The second one, the proximity principle, requires waste to be disposed of as close to the place of production as possible at one of the nearest appropriate waste disposal facilities. Finally, the third one, the precautionary principle, means that if it is known that an action may cause harm, it should not be done unless it can be satisfactorily proven not to cause harm. For example, smoking was strongly suspected of causing lung cancer long before the link was demonstrated conclusively. By then, many smokers had died of lung cancer, but many other people had already quit smoking because of the growing evidence that smoking was linked to lung cancer. These people were wisely exercising precaution despite some scientific uncertainty. These principles are made more concrete in the 1996 EU General Strategy on Waste, which sets out a preferred hierarchy of waste management operations. 1. Prevention of waste. 2. Recycling and reuse. 3. Optimum final disposal and improved monitoring. With regard to the EU legislation, there are some relevant areas for SMEs to be taken into account, such as air quality, chemicals, energy, greener products, environmental management, waste, water, state aid for environmental protection, and soil. The European environmental regulation concerning SMEs is actually a wide topic, and we are hereby focusing our attention only on those areas which are really relevant and useful for SMEs in helping them become environmentally compliant, such as energy, waste, and water. In order to get a better perception of this wide topic, you should visit the ECAP website section dedicated to it, namely the EU legislation one. After mentioning the ECAP EU legislation areas, we want to focus our attention on those which are considered as the core ones by the European Commission, given their social and environmental importance. These main areas are energy. According to the EU's main goal to reduce projected energy use by 20% by 2020. Waste, due to an EU-wide legislation framework. Water, since EU tries to avoid water pollution every day, preserving human and environmental health. Industrial emissions, defining the obligation to be met by industrial activities with a major pollution potential. The main legislative principles of these topics are listed in the next slide. With regard to the ECAP EU legislation areas, it is important to focus in particular on the principles in the fields of energy, waste, water, and industrial emissions. Energy principles. When discussing about the EU environmental legislation, it is fundamental to start with the Energy Efficiency Directive 27/2012, which defines the European goal of 20% energy consumption reduction by 2020. The directive can be applied to many sectors because energy and SMEs interact with each other in several situations, spanning from buildings where SMEs are located, polypropylene products produced, heating and cooling actions, energy transformation processes, transmission and distribution actions, and so on. Accordingly, among the main actions to pursue European goals, there are building renovations, utilities saving plans, frequent energy auditing, facilities financing, energy service certification. Waste principles. The principles are to be applied to all kinds of products in all sectors, in particular to manufacturing SMEs. The Waste Framework Directive, Directive 2008/98/EC, aims at promoting waste prevention, recycling and reusing, as well as improving and monitoring final disposal. Water principles. According to the high amount of water required by many SMEs activities every day, the principles stated in the Directive 2000/60/EC aims at establishing a community framework for inland surface protection, waters, transitional water, coastal waters, and groundwater. Industrial emissions principles. Last but not least, Directive 2010/75/EU regulates atmospheric pollution and volatile organic compounds emissions, as well as noise emissions from industrial plants. The directive also sets the principles of emission trading. Industrial emissions specifically belong to those SMEs which are involved in industrial scale installations. The directive contains provisions for combustion plants larger than 50 MW, waste incineration or co-incineration plants. Certain installations and activities using organic solvents, and installations producing titanium dioxide. In order to better understand the delicate issues described so far, as well as to provide some tips for enhancing SMEs' environmental compliance, here are some useful examples of the guidelines stemming from the mentioned directives on energy, waste, water, and industrial emissions. Let's start from the Energy Efficiency Directive 2012/27/EU. Imagine being an SME with many energy-related building elements. You are supposed to carry out periodic energy consumption and cost monitoring, as well as energy audits, aimed at identifying potential areas of improvement. If otherwise you are a service-oriented SME with a pool of old computers to be replaced, you should give your old laptops back to the supplier and make sure that they get recycled instead of throwing them in a regular waste container, as stated by the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive 2002/96/EC. The Water Framework Directive 2000/60/EC supports the activities of SMEs which use a large amount of water in improving, for example, drain techniques and liquid treatment processes, avoiding to throw organic waste in normal water drain. Finally, according to the Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control Directive 2008/1/EC, chemical SMEs which produce, for instance, insecticides and pesticides should not leave their industrial emissions in the air, as they are, but they are supposed to implement a recycling system in order to destroy all those emissions originated from production processes. After presenting the legislative instruments on environmental regulation, we are now going to examine and deeply analyze some technical instruments used by SMEs to comply with environmental legislation, such as life cycle assessment, environmental footprinting, and environmental impact assessments. Life cycle assessment tool, also known as LCA, represents the best framework to assess the potential environmental impacts of a product by drafting an inventory of relevant energy and material inputs and environmental impact. Evaluating the potential environmental footprint associated with identified inputs and releases, and interpreting the results to help you make a more informed decision. SMEs can use such instruments in order to increase their competitiveness, as well as to improve their environmental performance. The LCA tool does not only provide simple yes or no answers to SMEs' questions on the need of products and processes improvements, but it also provides quantitative and qualitative factual information, helping on several critical issues. The LCA process is composed by 4 main steps. The first one is the goal and scope phase, during which products and services to be assessed are defined. A functional basis for comparison is chosen, and the required level of detail is defined. The second step is the inventory analysis of extractions and emissions, aimed at identifying quantity and quality of energy and raw materials used, emissions to the atmosphere, water, and land. Such data are then combined in the process flowchart and related to the functional basis, and used during the impact assessment phase. The third phase, known as impact assessment phase, copes with analyzing the effects of the resource use. Emissions generated are grouped and quantified into a limited number of impact categories, which may then be weighed by importance. Such analysis finally leads to the fourth and final step, the interpretation phase, which reports the results of previous steps in the most informative way possible, with the aim of identifying and evaluating needs and opportunities to reduce the environmental impacts of products and services. Several practical examples of LCA implementation are available under the Best Practices section of the ECAP website. Other valuable technical instruments deployed in the field of SME sustainability management are represented by environmental footprinting. It measures the demand for natural capital which does not fit with the planet's ecological capacity to regenerate. Environmental impact assessment. Introduced by the Directive 2011/92 EU, is a useful cross-cutting environmental policy tool used to predict environmental consequences, both positive or negative, of a specific plan, policy, program, or project before it is implemented. The assessment also aims at proposing measures to adjust impacts to acceptable levels or to investigate new technological solutions. In general, the analysis of SMEs' environmental footprinting supports the assessment of their business impacts, and all footprinting reports are used both to improve their working mechanisms and to inform managers and owners about the priority areas of improvement. For more information on these topics, just click on the direct link provided at the bottom of the page. Eventually, the other important point of the EU environmental regulation concerning SMEs is the one regarding financial support mechanisms, such as the LIFE program, TOSME, or Horizon 2020. The main financial support mechanisms provided by the European Commission are the following. LIFE program, which is the EU's funding instrument to support environmental and climate actions. Horizon 2020 program, with specific focus on research and innovation. the Competitiveness of Enterprises and Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises program, also known as COSME program, which aims at enhancing the competitiveness, especially of medium-sized enterprises, running since 2014 to 2020. These financial support mechanisms can be used for any kind of initiative referred to in information, aligned tools and websites, active direct support and advice, training and networks, also inherent to all kinds of sectors such as agriculture, leather, transportation and cross-sector, targeting environmental topics. For further information, please follow the link to the ECAP website section dedicated to these topics, namely the Funding Opportunities Program. Further details are provided on the websites dedicated to single financial support mechanisms. The European Commission's DG Environment ECAP Help Desk team thanks you for taking part in the e-learning module on European Environmental Regulation for SMEs.